The secret begins to unravel. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves as Ellie Carter, a 10-year-old girl with bright green eyes and golden brown hair, stood outside her school, waiting for her mother. The school day had been long, and Ellie was eager to get home, kick off her shoes, and dive into one of the adventure books she loved. The bell had rung nearly 10 minutes ago, and most of her classmates had already left. A few stragglers remained, talking in small groups or waiting for their rides. Ellie's best friend, Mia, had waved goodbye earlier before hopping into her dad's car, leaving Ellie to stand by herself near the front gate. She shifted from one foot to another, hugging her backpack to her chest, wondering what was taking her mother so long. Helen Carter was always punctual. She was the kind of mother who had alarms set for everything: homework time, bedtime, even snack time. She was the planner, the organizer, the one who made sure everything was perfect. Finally, just as Ellie was about to walk back toward the school office to ask if she could call home, she saw her mother's familiar silver sedan pulling up to the curb. Ellie's heart lifted with relief. She pushed open the passenger side door and climbed inside, inhaling the faint vanilla scent that always lingered in the car. "Hey, sweetheart," Helen greeted, giving her a warm smile. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was terrible." "It's okay, Mom," Ellie said, buckling her seatbelt. "I was just starting to think you forgot me." Helen laughed lightly. "Forget my favorite girl? Never." Ellie grinned, but the moment was quickly overshadowed by something strange. As her mother pulled away from the school, Ellie noticed that Helen was gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly, her knuckles pale against the black leather. Her jaw was clenched, and every few seconds, she would glance up at the rearview mirror, as if she were checking for something or someone. Ellie's stomach twisted. "Mom, are you okay?" Helen blinked, as if startled by the question. "What?" "Yes, of course, honey. Just a little tired." Ellie frowned, unconvinced. Her mother was always calm, always in control. Seeing her like this, nervous, almost jumpy, felt completely out of place. "Did something happen?" Ellie pressed. Helen forced a smile. "No, sweetie. Just a long day at work." She reached out to ruffle Ellie's hair. "Let's go home and have some hot chocolate, yeah? It's getting cold out." Ellie wanted to believe her, but the uneasy feeling in her gut didn't fade. Instead, it only grew stronger when they stopped at a red light, and her mother suddenly reached out to lock all the doors. The small click echoed in the silence, and Ellie's pulse quickened. Why did she do that? She turned slightly to glance out the back window, her eyes scanning the cars behind them. Nothing seemed unusual, just an old blue pickup truck, a minivan, and a black sit-in. None of them looked particularly threatening. But when she turned back around, she caught her mother's reflection in the rearview mirror, and the look in Helen's eyes made her stomach drop. Fear. Something was wrong. Very, very wrong. The first clue. As they drove toward home, Ellie tried to shake the weird feeling crawling up her spine. Maybe her mom really was just having a bad day. Maybe work had been stressful. Maybe she was overthinking things. But then, at the next stoplight, something even stranger happened. A missing persons advertisement flashed on the giant digital billboard at the intersection. Ellie wasn't paying much attention to it at first. She had seen hundreds of missing person posters before. Some were kids, some were adults. They were sad, but they didn't usually stand out to her. Until now. This time, her breath caught in her throat. The ad showed a young toddler, about 2 years old, with big green eyes and curly golden brown hair. He looked familiar, uncomfortably familiar. Ellie's gaze remained fixed on the screen as the words beneath the boy's photo became clear. Missing. James Williams. Last seen at age 2. Disappeared from Oakwood Adoption Center. If you have any information, call the police immediately. Ellie's mind went blank. Her stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. The boy on the screen. He looked just like her. Her mother hadn't noticed yet. She was staring straight ahead, her fingers white-knuckling the steering wheel again. Ellie's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Mom." Helen blinked, startled, and glanced down at Ellie before following her gaze toward the billboard. For a split second, her expression was unreadable, and then her face went pale. Ellie had never seen her mother look so scared. The light turned green. The car behind them honked, jolting Helen back into action. She pressed her foot on the gas, accelerating much faster than usual. Ellie was too stunned to speak. The eerie resemblance between her and the missing boy on the billboard made her head spin. Same hair, same eyes, same soft features. The only real difference was the fact that the boy in the photo was younger. But that wasn't possible, was it? She was Ellie Carter. She had always been Ellie Carter, hadn't she? The uneasy feeling in her stomach twisted tighter. She had to ask, even though she was scared of the answer. "Mom," Ellie said hesitantly. Helen didn't look at her. Ellie swallowed hard. Her fingers curled around the hem of her sweater. "That boy in the ad," she said slowly, carefully choosing her words. "He looks like me." Her mother's hands tightened on the wheel. For the first time ever, she didn't respond. Ellie felt her pulse pound in her ears. "Mom," she pressed. Helen took a slow breath. "That's just a coincidence, sweetheart," she said, forcing a laugh. But the sound was unnatural, almost forced. "Lots of kids look alike." Ellie's skin prickled. She knew her mother, knew every tone in her voice. And right now, she was lying. A strange reaction. The rest of the drive home was tense. Helen didn't speak. Ellie didn't either. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions. Why had her mother reacted like that? Why did she look so afraid? And why, for the first time in her life, did Ellie suddenly feel like a stranger in her own skin? The silence that spoke volumes. The drive home felt longer than usual, even though Ellie knew the route by heart. Every turn, every passing streetlight, and every familiar house rolling past the window felt strangely foreign now. The weight of the moment, the boy on the billboard, her mother's reaction, pressed down on her, thick and suffocating like a heavy fog. Helen Carter had always been the person Ellie trusted the most, the one who made everything feel safe and certain. But today, something was different. There was a hesitation in her mother's voice, an unnatural stiffness in her posture, and worst of all, an unwillingness to meet Ellie's eyes. Ellie stole another glance at her mother, trying to read the expression on her face. Helen had always been a woman of composure, someone who rarely showed fear or uncertainty. But right now, her jaw was clenched so tightly that Ellie could see the small muscle near her temple twitching. Her hands, still gripping the steering wheel, were so tense that the veins on her wrists stood out. The realization sent a chill down Ellie's spine. Her mother wasn't just nervous. She was terrified. The silence stretched between them, growing thicker with every passing second. Ellie wanted to ask again, to push her mother for answers, but something in the air made her hold back. She had learned long ago that her mother was good at avoiding things she didn't want to talk about. Whenever Ellie asked about her early childhood, before she started remembering things on her own, her mother always kept her answers short. There were no baby albums in their house, no old family videos of her as a toddler, nothing that showed her life before she was about 4 years old. Every time Ellie had asked why, her mother had always given the same response. "Oh, we lost a lot of things when we moved houses. There's nothing too interesting in those old photos anyway." At the time, Ellie had accepted it. But now it felt like a carefully rehearsed lie. The car pulled into their driveway, and Helen cut the engine with a sharp, deliberate twist of her wrist. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, scattering dry autumn leaves across the pavement. The quiet was almost deafening. Helen finally exhaled and turned to Ellie with an attempt at a smile. Come on, sweetheart. Let's go inside. I'll make that hot chocolate I promised. Ellie hesitated. Her mother's voice was gentle, but the unease lingering in her eyes hadn't faded. She could tell Helen was trying to shift the conversation, to pretend that nothing had happened. But Ellie couldn't ignore it. Not this time. Mom, Ellie said, her voice steadier than she expected. Why did you look so scared back there? Why did you lock the car doors? And why did you drive so fast after seeing that billboard? Helen's fingers twitched against the car keys, and for the briefest moment, a flicker of something, panic, maybe, flashed across her face. But then she took a deep breath and placed a hand on Ellie's arm. You're imagining things, sweetheart, she said, her tone soft, almost soothing. I was just startled, that's all. You know how those missing person ads always make me anxious. It's just hard to think about kids being taken away from their families. Ellie didn't move. She knew her mother well enough to tell when she was lying. And right now, this was a lie. Helen opened the car door and stepped out, leaving Ellie sitting there, heart pounding in her chest. A part of her wanted to let it go, to believe that this was just a weird moment, that she was reading too much into it. But deep down she knew that was just wishful thinking. Something wasn't right, and she was going to find out what. The discovery that changed everything. Ellie followed her mother inside, but the warmth of home didn't feel the same anymore. The living room, usually so cozy and familiar, now felt foreign. She tried to focus on the normal things, the soft hum of the heater, the faint scent of vanilla from her mother's favorite candle, the way the golden sunlight spilled through the windows. But none of it helped. Helen moved quickly, heading straight for the kitchen. Go set your backpack down, she called over her shoulder. I'll have the hot chocolate ready in a few minutes. Ellie didn't respond. Instead, she found herself wandering down the hallway, her steps slow and thoughtful. Her mind kept circling back to the same question. Why would her mother react that way to a missing person ad? The only explanation that made sense was one Ellie didn't want to believe. But if it was true, she had to find proof. Her feet led her to the door of her parents' bedroom. Normally, she wouldn't even think about going inside without permission. Her parents had always been strict about privacy. But today was different. Today, she needed answers. Taking a deep breath, Ellie placed her hand on the doorknob and turned it slowly. The door creaked open, revealing the neatly arranged room inside. The bed was perfectly made, the dressers dust-free, the shelves lined with books and framed photographs. Everything looked normal. But Ellie knew that appearances could be deceiving. She moved carefully, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached for the nightstand drawer. It was unlocked. That was a good sign. But when she slid it open, she found nothing unusual inside, just a few old letters, a pair of reading glasses, and some loose change. She tried the next drawer. Nothing. Her pulse quickened. Then, just as she was about to give up, she noticed something at the very back of the bottom drawer, a small locked box. Ellie's breath caught. She had never seen this box before. It was plain, black, and simple, but something about it made her heart race. She hesitated only for a second before reaching out and trying to open it. Locked. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for anything that looked like a key. If her mother kept something locked away, it had to be important. Maybe even important enough to explain the way she had been acting. Then she spotted it, a small key sitting inside a porcelain jewelry dish on top of the dresser. Her fingers closed around it before she could second-guess herself. She hurried back to the drawer, slid the key into the lock, and turned it. Click. The lid lifted, revealing a stack of old, slightly crumpled documents. Ellie's hand shook as she picked up the first one. And then, her world shattered. The document was a birth certificate. But it wasn't hers. It was for someone named James William Carter. Her hand started to tremble as she pulled out another document. An adoption record. Her breathing quickened. The words on the page blurred for a second before she forced herself to focus. Her eyes landed on the line that mattered most. Adopted from Oakwood Adoption Center. Oakwood. The same place listed on the missing persons ad. Ellie's heartbeat pounded in her ears, drowning out everything else. The room seemed to close in around her, suffocating, overwhelming. Her legs felt weak, her hands clammy. She wasn't Ellie Carter. She wasn't who she thought she was. Everything she had known. Her name, her family, her past. It was all a lie. And the worst part, her mother had known all along. The confrontation that changed everything. Ellie sat frozen on the carpeted floor of her parents' bedroom, the crumpled adoption papers still clutched in her trembling hands. Her heart pounded so loudly that she could barely hear the ticking of the clock on the nightstand. Everything she had ever known. Her name, her family, her entire life, was unraveling before her eyes. The truth wasn't just shocking. It was devastating. She wasn't Ellie Carter. She wasn't the biological daughter of Helen and David Carter. She was someone else entirely, James William Carter, a child who had gone missing. A child whose face had been plastered across a missing persons ad. A child who had been taken. Her stomach twisted violently as she tried to make sense of it. Her mother had always told her that she was born in a different state before they moved here when she was little. That was why there were no baby pictures. That was why there were no old videos of her as a toddler. It had all been a lie. The move wasn't about a job opportunity. It wasn't about a fresh start. It was about hiding. Ellie's throat tightened as the full weight of realization hit her. Her parents, her kidnappers, had known. They had stolen her from the life she was supposed to have, from the real parents who had probably searched for her, cried for her, wondered where she had gone. Had she had real parents before this? People who had loved her? The idea made her chest ache with confusion and betrayal. She had to confront her mother. She had to hear the truth, straight from her. Shoving the papers back into the lockbox, Ellie closed it and placed it exactly where she had found it. She didn't want her mother to know she had seen them. Not yet. Taking one last deep breath to steady herself, she crept out of the room and down the hallway toward the kitchen. Her mother was standing at the counter, stirring a steaming cup of hot chocolate, her back turned. The whole scene looked so normal, so ordinary, like any other evening. But it wasn't normal. Not anymore. Ellie hesitated for only a second before speaking. "Mom." Helen turned, smiling. "Hey, sweetheart. The hot chocolate's ready. Who is James William Carter?" The question sliced through the air like a blade. Helen froze, the spoon in her hand clattering against the counter. For a brief moment, her expression was completely blank, as if her mind had short-circuited. But then something else flickered across her face. Fear. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but Ellie saw it. I don't know what you're talking about," Helen said, forcing a small laugh, but her voice wavered, betraying her. Ellie felt her pulse quicken. "Yes, you do. I found the adoption papers in your drawer. They say I was adopted from Oakwood Adoption Center." She took a step closer, her voice rising. "That's the same place on the missing persons ad. The little boy on that ad. He looks like me." "Mom, why do I look like him?" Helen's face drained of color. A long silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Then Helen sighed. A deep, weary sigh, like someone who had just realized they were out of time. She set down the spoon with deliberate slowness and turned fully to face Ellie. "Sweetheart," she said softly, her hands reaching for Ellie's. "I think we should sit down and talk about this." Ellie flinched away. "No, no more lying. No more pretending. I want the truth, Mom. Right now." Helen swallowed hard. For a moment, she seemed to consider denying it again, but she must have seen the determination in Ellie's eyes. There was no escape from this. She took another deep breath, then nodded. "Okay," Helen whispered. "I'll tell you everything. The truth comes out." Helen led Ellie to the living room, where they sat on the couch. The air between them was thick with tension, the weight of what was about to be said pressing down on both of them. Helen took a moment, rubbing her temples as if preparing herself. Then she began. "I didn't steal you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "At least, not in the way you're thinking." Ellie's stomach clenched. "Then explain. Because right now, it looks exactly like that." Helen exhaled shakily. "It's true that you were born as James William Carter. But Ellie, you were never supposed to go back to the life you had before. Because the people you came from, they didn't deserve you." Ellie blinked. "What do you mean?" Helen hesitated, as if struggling to find the right words. "Your biological parents. They weren't good people. They didn't take care of you the way a child should be cared for. They neglected you, mistreated you. That's why you ended up at Oakwood Adoption Center." Ellie's breath caught. "I was in an orphanage." Helen nodded. "Yes, you were only 2 years old, and you had no one. I was working there as a volunteer at the time, and the moment I saw you, I knew I couldn't leave you there. I knew that if I didn't take you, you might end up in a home where you wouldn't be loved." Ellie shook her head, her mind struggling to process everything. "But why didn't you adopt me the right way? Why did you take me and change my identity?" Helen looked down, guilt etched across her face. "Because the system wouldn't have let me. I wasn't approved to adopt. I had applied, but I was denied because of my past. The agency didn't think I was fit to be a mother. But I knew I was. I knew I could give you the life you deserved." Ellie stared at her, searching her mother's face for any sign of deception. But Helen wasn't lying. Not this time. Still, none of this made sense. If what her mother was saying was true, why had there been a missing person ad? Why had the police been looking for her? "So, my real parents," Ellie said carefully. "They didn't want me." Helen hesitated. "Your birth mother died when you were very young. And your father, he gave up his parental rights. He was never involved in your life. That's why you ended up at Oakwood." A deep ache spread through Ellie's chest. She had always imagined, if she ever thought about it at all, that her real parents had lost her, that they had searched for her. But if what her mother was saying was true, she had been unwanted, forgotten. And yet, there was still something that didn't add up. "Then why is there a missing persons ad?" Ellie asked. "If no one wanted me, why am I on a billboard?" Helen's face darkened, and for the first time since they sat down, true fear entered her eyes. "I don't know," she admitted, "but whoever put that ad up, they want to find you. And that means we need to leave." Ellie's stomach dropped. "What?" Helen's eyes were frantic now. "We can't stay here, Ellie. We have to pack. Tonight. We need to go somewhere safe before whoever is looking for you finds us." Ellie shook her head. No, I'm not running away. I want to know the truth, the full truth." Helen's hands trembled as she grabbed Ellie's shoulders. "Ellie, please, we have to go. I did everything to protect you. If they find you, I don't know what will happen. You don't know what kind of people are out there." Ellie's pulse thundered in her ears. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if she could trust the woman who had raised her. And for the first time, she realized, maybe she had been running her whole life. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the one in danger. Maybe her mother was. Running from the truth. Ellie felt like she had stepped into a nightmare. The weight of the truth pressed down on her, suffocating and relentless. She wasn't who she thought she was. Her life had been a carefully constructed lie, woven together by the only person she had ever trusted, her mother. Or rather, the woman she had believed was her mother. And now she was being asked to run. Again. Helen moved swiftly around the house, pulling suitcases from the closet and shoving clothes inside without care. There was an urgency in her every movement, a kind of frantic energy that only came when someone was truly afraid. Ellie sat frozen on the couch, watching as her mother zipped up a duffel bag and tossed it toward the door. The house, which had always been warm and comforting, now felt like a prison. "We don't have time, Ellie," Helen said, barely glancing at her. "We need to leave before someone comes looking for you." Ellie swallowed hard. "I don't understand. If what you told me is true, if no one wanted me, then why are we running? Who would be looking for me?" Helen's back stiffened. Her fingers tightened around the zipper of another suitcase before she turned, her expression unreadable. "I don't know," she admitted, but there was something in her voice. Hesitation. Fear. A lie. "But if someone put up a missing persons ad, it means they know you're alive. And that means we're not safe anymore." Ellie's mind reeled. Safe. What did that even mean? All her life, she had felt safe. She had been loved. But now, doubt crept into her mind like a slow-moving storm. What if? Ellie hesitated, feeling the words taste foreign on her tongue. What if I want to find out who put up that ad? What if I want to know the truth? Helen's entire body went rigid. Her eyes darkened as she slowly turned toward Ellie, her face unreadable. "You don't want that," she said quietly, but there was an edge to her voice, something almost threatening. Ellie felt her stomach twist. "Why not? What are you not telling me?" For a moment, Helen looked at her, really looked at her, as if trying to decide what to say. Then she let out a shaky breath and dropped onto the couch beside Ellie, resting her hands on her knees. She looked exhausted, as if she had aged years in a matter of minutes. "You have no idea what kind of people are out there," Helen murmured. "You think whoever put that ad up is someone who cares about you, someone who wants to reunite with you. No, Ellie, the world doesn't work that way. There are people who will use you, people who will hurt you if they find you." Ellie shivered at the way her mother said those words. There was something almost desperate in her voice. "But who?" Ellie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who would want to hurt me?" Helen closed her eyes for a moment before whispering, "Your father." Ellie's breath caught in her throat. My real father." Helen nodded. "He wasn't a good man, Ellie. He was dangerous. He gave up his rights when you were a baby, but I don't think he ever truly let you go. And if he's the one looking for you now—" Helen's voice trailed off, her eyes filled with something dark and haunted. Ellie shook her head, her mind spinning. "But you said he didn't want me. You said he abandoned me." Helen exhaled sharply, standing up again and gripping the back of the couch. "I thought he did. I thought he had moved on. But now I'm not sure." She ran a hand through her hair, frustration evident on her face. "And I am not going to let him take you, Ellie. Do you hear me? I will not let him take you." Ellie's head ached with the weight of it all. It was too much information, too much fear, too many lies wrapped in half-truths. She wanted to believe her mother, wanted to trust her, but something inside her whispered that she wasn't getting the whole story. "You don't even know if it's him," Ellie said slowly. "You're just assuming." Helen snapped her gaze toward her. "I know," she said, her voice firm, unyielding. "I know because I've spent the last 8 years making sure no one ever found you. And now someone has. That means we run." Ellie stared at her, realization sinking in. Her mother, Helen, was never planning to let her decide anything. She had already made the choice. "We leave in 10 minutes, Helen announced, moving toward the hallway again. "Go grab anything important. We don't have much time." But Ellie didn't move. Instead, she felt her fingers curl tightly into the fabric of her jeans, her chest rising and falling with shaky breaths. She couldn't run. Not this time. She needed to know the truth. And there was only one way to do that. The call that changed everything. Ellie waited until her mother disappeared into the bedroom to grab more things before she made her move. Heart pounding, she bolted toward the kitchen, snatching up the house phone from the wall. Her fingers shook as she quickly dialed the number she had memorized from the missing persons ad. It rang once, twice. Then, "Hello," A deep male voice answered, one that sent a strange chill down her spine. Ellie hesitated, her throat dry. What if her mother was right? What if she was putting herself in danger? But she needed to know. Taking a deep breath, she whispered, "My name is Ellie Carter. I think I might be James William Carter, the boy from the missing persons ad." Silence. Then the voice on the other end broke. "Oh my God," the man breathed. "James." His voice was thick with emotion, as if he had been holding back years of pain. "James, is that really you?" Ellie felt her stomach twist. James, that was supposed to be her name. But it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like hers. "Who are you?" Ellie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man inhaled sharply. "I'm your uncle. My name is David Williams. I've been looking for you for 8 years. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. "Ellie?" The man's voice grew urgent. "Are you safe? Where are you?" Ellie swallowed hard, her mind racing. Should she tell him? Could she trust him? Then, before she could say another word, she heard footsteps, her mother's footsteps, approaching fast. Panic surged through her. "I have to go," she whispered hurriedly. "Please don't tell anyone I called." "James, wait." Ellie slammed the phone back onto the receiver just as Helen entered the kitchen, her eyes narrowing. "What are you doing?" Helen asked slowly. Ellie forced a smile. "Just getting some water." Helen stared at her for a long moment, suspicion flickering in her eyes. But then she nodded and turned away, grabbing one of the packed bags. Ellie exhaled shakily, her mind spinning. She had made the call. And now, everything was about to change. The escape plan. Ellie's hands trembled as she walked back into the living room, her heartbeat loud in her ears. She had done it. She had made the call. Somewhere out there, a man claiming to be her uncle was now aware that she was alive, that she was still out here, still missing. But was she really missing? Or was she exactly where she was meant to be? The thought tangled in her mind like thorny vines. Her mother, Helen, was in full motion, moving around the house in a frenzy, stuffing last-minute essentials into the suitcases she had dragged into the entryway. The sight made Ellie's stomach twist. This wasn't a vacation. This wasn't even normal. This was an escape. Helen hadn't slowed down since she saw that missing persons ad. She was determined to leave, to take Ellie with her. And if they left, Ellie knew one thing for certain. She might never know the truth. She might never find out who she really was. Ellie clenched her fists, feeling the paper-thin walls of trust between her and Helen crumble. She had spent her whole life thinking this woman was her protector, that she had been loved and cared for unconditionally. But what if that love was built on lies? What if her mother had taken her for reasons she didn't understand? Ellie sucked in a breath, her hands shaking slightly as she stuffed them into the pockets of her hoodie. She had to act normal. If her mother suspected that she was stalling, she would never let her out of her sight. She had to think. She had to find a way out. The moment of decision. "Ellie," Helen called, her voice strained but firm. "Get your coat on. We're leaving in 5 minutes." Ellie nodded stiffly, pretending to obey as she grabbed her coat from the hook near the door. But her mind was racing. How could she stall long enough for someone to find her? Would the police come? Would her supposed uncle track her down? Or worse, would Helen disappear with her forever? The moment that thought crossed her mind, panic set in. She needed an escape route. Now, Ellie's gaze flickered toward the front door, but she knew Helen would be watching her every move. If she tried to run that way, she would be stopped immediately. She looked toward the back door, but the security lock was in place, and her mother had the keys. Her only option. The window. Ellie's pulse quickened. The window in her bedroom. It wasn't big, but it was just wide enough for her to squeeze through if she acted quickly. But could she really do it? Could she really run? Helen was the only mother she had ever known. She had fed her, held her when she was sick, tucked her in at night, whispered "I love you" as Ellie drifted off to sleep. Could she turn her back on all of that? A lump formed in Ellie's throat. Then she thought about the adoption papers, the missing ad, the fear in her mother's eyes when she had seen that billboard. No, she had to go. She had to know the truth. The great escape. Ellie inhaled deeply, forcing her body to move casually toward the hallway. "I need to grab something from my room real quick," she said, keeping her voice as normal as possible. Helen barely glanced at her, too focused on zipping up the last suitcase. "Be quick." Ellie nodded and slipped down the hallway. The second she stepped into her bedroom, she moved fast. She locked the door. Her hand shook as she turned toward the window, fingers fumbling with the latch. The lock stuck for a second, and panic clawed at her chest. Come on, come on." She wrenched it open, feeling the rush of cold autumn air hit her face. She could hear Helen moving in the living room, the sound of footsteps getting closer. She was out of time. Ellie climbed onto her desk, pushing the window up as far as it would go. She swung one leg over the sill, her heart pounding in her ears. Then, bang, the door handle rattled. "Ellie." Helen's voice was sharp, almost panicked. Ellie sucked in a sharp breath, shoving herself through the window. Her foot slipped on the outside ledge, and she barely caught herself before hitting the ground. She turned, scrambling away from the house just as she heard the door slam open behind her. Eli. Helen's scream ripped through the night air. But Ellie didn't stop. She ran. Barefoot, heart pounding, legs aching, she ran. The cold air burned her lungs, but she didn't care. She could hear Helen's footsteps pounding behind her, but Ellie had one advantage. She was smaller, faster, and desperate. She didn't know where she was running to. She only knew one thing. She couldn't let Helen catch her. A stranger in the dark. Ellie's feet hit the pavement hard as she darted through backyards, slipping between fences, dodging streetlights. She needed a hiding spot, somewhere Helen wouldn't find her. Then, a pair of headlights flickered at the end of the block. A black SUV. It was parked, but as Ellie slowed, gasping for breath, the driver's door opened. Her heart leaped into her throat. A man stepped out. A man she had never seen before. He was tall, with dark eyes and salt and pepper hair, dressed in a dark jacket. He looked shocked, like he hadn't expected to see her. Then his face softened, and his lips parted in disbelief. "James." Ellie froze. No one had ever called her that in real life. Only in documents, only in whispers. The man took a slow step forward, his voice thick with emotion. "Oh my God, it's really you." Ellie's breath hitched. Was this her uncle? Could she trust him? Behind her, she heard Helen's voice screaming in the distance. "Eli, stay up. Come back." Ellie whirled around. She could see her mother running toward her, her face pale, her eyes wild with fear. "Don't go with him." Helen's voice cracked. "Eli, pleas." Ellie turned back toward the stranger. Everything in her life had led to this moment. One choice, one decision. Helen, who had raised her, loved her, but lied to her. Or this man, who might be telling the truth, or might be another dangerous lie. Her chest heaved. Her head spun. The man reached out his hand, his voice desperate. "Please, James, let me take you home." Ellie took a slow step forward, then another. Helen's cry shattered the night. "Eli." And then, Ellie made her choice. She reached for the man's hand. Helen's scream was the last thing she heard before the world rushed away. The final truth. The night air was thick with tension, and Ellie's heart pounded in her chest as she gripped the stranger's hand. Her fingers trembled, her mind screaming at her to make sense of what she had just done. She had chosen to go with the man who claimed to be her uncle. Behind her, Helen's desperate cries rang through the darkness. "Eli, no, please, don't go with him. He's lying to you." But Ellie didn't turn back. The moment she had reached for the man's hand, he had moved fast, pulling her toward the SUV, his grip firm but not painful. His breathing was ragged, and his movements sharp with urgency. "Come on, kid," the man said, his voice tight. "We don't have time." Ellie barely had a chance to process his words before he pulled open the passenger door and helped her inside. Before she could even buckle her seatbelt, he slammed the door and hurried around to the driver's side. Helen's voice cut through the night like a knife. "Stop. Don't take here." The man, her supposed uncle, threw himself into the driver's seat and turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and just as Helen reached the car, the tires screeched against the pavement. Ellie gasped, her body jerking forward as the SUV sped off into the darkness. She twisted in her seat, looking through the rear windshield. Helen was standing in the middle of the road, her arms outstretched, her face twisted in pure devastation. Then, just like that, she disappeared from sight. Ellie's stomach twisted violently. What have I done? A stranger's intentions. The SUV moved fast, weaving through the empty roads. Ellie sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her breathing shallow. The reality of the situation was setting in fast. She had just left the only life she had ever known, the only mother she had ever known. And now she was sitting beside a man she had never met before tonight. Her pulse raced. Had she made a mistake? Had she just thrown herself into something even more dangerous? The man, David Williams, let out a deep breath, glancing at her as he drove. "You okay?" Ellie didn't respond at first. She just stared at him, studying his face in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. His jaw was tense, his brow furrowed, but his eyes, his dark, tired eyes, weren't cruel. She swallowed hard. "Are you really my uncle?" David nodded, keeping his hands tight on the wheel. "Yes." Ellie's fingers dug into the fabric of her hoodie. "Prove it." David exhaled through his nose. "I figured you'd say that." He reached into the center console and pulled out a worn leather wallet. Keeping one hand on the wheel, he flipped it open and pulled out an old photograph before handing it to her. Ellie took it hesitantly. It was a faded picture of a baby, a little boy, no older than 2, with golden brown hair and bright green eyes, a boy who looked eerily familiar. Like her. Ellie's throat tightened. "That's me." David nodded. "Yeah, that's you, James." Hearing that name again sent a strange feeling through her. It didn't fit. It felt like a puzzle piece that didn't belong, but at the same time, it was a part of something bigger, something she couldn't ignore. Ellie's fingers tightened around the photograph. "Why was there a missing persons ad for me?" she asked quietly. David's jaw clenched. His grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Because you were taken," he said, "and no one ever stopped looking for you." The truth that shattered everything. Ellie's breath hitched. Taken. The word felt so final, so heavy. But Helen had told her a different story. Helen had said that her real father had abandoned her, that she had been unwanted, that no one had cared. Could that have been a lie too? Ellie's voice shook. "Helen said my real parents didn't want me, that I was left at an orphanage." David let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. "That's not true. That's what she wanted you to believe." He looked at Ellie, his expression dark with something between anger and heartbreak. "Your mother, your real mother, loved you more than anything. She would have never given you up." Ellie's body went rigid. Real mother. Loved her. But Helen had said. Ellie sucked in a sharp breath. "Then where is she?" David's hands tensed on the wheel. His jaw locked. His lips pressed into a thin line. Then, quietly, carefully, he said, "She's dead." Ellie felt like the air had been punched out of her lungs. She shook her head, her eyes stinging with sudden tears. "No." David swallowed hard. "She died 8 years ago. Not long after you were taken." Ellie gripped the photograph in her hands. The weight of it crushed her. Helen had lied. She had stolen her. She had told her that no one had wanted her, but all this time, the truth had been the opposite. Ellie felt sick. She had spent her entire life loving a woman who had taken her away from the people who had really cared about her. Her real mother had died searching for her. A sob escaped her throat. David's expression softened, and for the first time, his voice held something gentle. "I know this is a lot," he murmured. "I know you don't know me. And I know I probably feel like a stranger right now. But I promise you, James, Ellie, whatever name you want to go by, you are not alone. You have people who love you, who never gave up on you." Ellie stared at him, her chest tight with emotions she didn't know how to untangle. This man, her uncle, was telling her a truth she had never even imagined. And deep down she knew. It was real. For the first time, it felt real. The final decision. As they drove through the dark roads, Ellie closed her eyes. She thought about the life she had left behind. The bedtime stories, the school lunches, the safe, simple, structured days. Then she thought about the truth. The mother she had lost. The lies she had lived in. The fear she had been raised under, unknowing, unseeing. She had made her decision the moment she ran out that window. She had chosen truth. She had chosen herself. And as the SUV moved forward, taking her toward a future she had never expected, Ellie knew she could never go back.